Okay, so today's topic is self-education, and I think there's a lot to unpack here. As always, the topic is a starting point, so it's completely fine if we end up talking about something that may feel really remote or that doesn't seem directly related to it, because very often the topics that we choose are quite complex and have lots of different implications. So it's completely okay if it makes you think about stuff that it doesn't feel like it's directly related to self-education. And self-education, I think, is something that has both existed for such a long time, like thousands of years ago. It is absolutely not new to decide that you want to learn something for yourself and to go and get the resources and teach yourself something. But it has been growing really fast in the past few years because of all of the resources that we have, all of the access to education, to content that we have. And there is a little bit of tension, I would say, between the old, which I would call credentialism, which is you used to say, hey, look at my certificate, look at my diploma, or I went to that university and so I know this, you can trust that, right? And all of this new approach of saying I'm self-taught. And you see that in so many different areas, whether someone who did a computer science degree and actually decided, and someone who decided to teach themselves, the same for art, design, etc., where you have so many people today who are successful and didn't get a formal education. They learned on their own. So this is what I would love to discuss with you today: the benefits, the drawbacks, the challenges. And I think if you're part of the Ness Labs community, probably a lot of you are self-learners, like people who are very happy to go and design your own curriculum for yourself. So as a little icebreaker, the question that I want to ask you is, do you consider yourself a self-learner, and why? Like how does that actually manifest itself in your life? You can just raise your hand if you, yes, Nish.
I do, just because firstly, I don't think I use 80 to 90% of the stuff that I went to college and got a degree for. So a lot of the stuff that I do today, and also in my job, in my paid job, I kind of learned either on the job or on the side, enough so that I'm qualified, or like in the eyes of the company, qualified to do the job. So I think, that has kind of shifted my views around, like, do I need a formal education to be qualified for these types of so yeah, I think it's mainly just about following curiosity and like solving the problems as you find them, as opposed to find like a top-down curriculum where, with this illusion of like you're going to learn everything about the subject just by following us. I think it's a very much like a discover and solving problems as you go.
This is such a great point. I think, can you raise your hand if you feel like a lot of the stuff that you learned in university has not been as helpful as you expected after you graduated? Okay, that's a lot of people. Yeah, Nish, I think this is a great point, and I think lots of us have felt this. And obviously, there are professions where, I'm very glad my doctor went to university. This is great, right? There are professions where you probably still want that structure. But there are also so many of them where what you're being taught in school and what you're being asked to do in real life on the job doesn't match at all. There's a massive gap between the two. That's very interesting. Anyone else wants to? Yes, Julie.
On that note, I just wanted to mention, I'm an adjunct professor, and I start every semester teaching my freshman students with a couple statistics. In the US, of all of the people that have college degrees, only 26% of them have a job that's even remotely related to their college degree. And also I think it's 75% of jobs that will exist in 10 years haven't been invented yet. So I teach all of my students that you have to have that intellectual curiosity. You have to keep learning new things all the time. I'm a programmer, and so I knew that lifelong learning was always going to be part of my career. And so I pointedly invest a lot of my time and my money into furthering my education on my own.
This is amazing. And you're also right. Something that's related to what you just said too is that especially in lots of the new disciplines, the new kind of jobs, they're moving so fast. You can become obsolete after 3 years after graduating if you just rely on what you learned at school. So being a lifelong learner is almost like, you know, survival, like you need to do that if you want to keep a job and keep being relevant. You'll have to kind of update your knowledge all the time. This is great, and I love that we have a professor in the conversation, because this is like I'd love to have your perspective on lots of the stuff we're going to discuss. Yes, Rachel.
I actually want to talk about my little niece, because I think in some ways we've forgotten how to learn. So that curiosity and how we naturally are born as curious learners. I think in the way the education system of how we are taught to learn, and it's not very holistic either, it's very subject specific. And deciding which option to take so early on in your life and not be able to, I think someone called it as squiggly careers is the new norm. You know, is the education system really for employability only, or is it more than that? And I'm a person that learns very project-based and follow my curiosity. That's where I do my best work. But even though I have a formal education, I think very similar resonates with everyone here. I've pivoted a lot, and actually a lot of my jobs have been almost quite new. It's the emerging stuff, like no one probably heard of service design, but and that's quite a new field, for example. But I used to do UX, user experience, or I used to do programming once upon a time. So I think that lifelong learning and curiosity, it's those kind of transferable skills that's super key, I would say.
Absolutely, and it reminds me of a word I only learned a couple of years ago, but I saw a woman calling herself a multi-hyphenate, and I thought it was so interesting because the way she described it is that when I'm at a party, I'm the annoying person where they ask me, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Okay, wait, do you have 5 minutes?" Because they couldn't just say, here's my role. That's the one thing that I do. And the traditional educational system, you know, you're talking about your niece going through this, like hasn't adapted to this yet. And I remember personally, for example, when I was in high school, I loved poetry, philosophy, and biology. And I was torn because in the French system, we have only 3 linear paths that you can pick to do the equivalent of your SATs or your A levels, where it's like literature or economics or science. And you can't be someone who's like, I actually really like science, but I also really like poetry and philosophy, etc. And you can't do this. And it's very frustrating, I think, as a kid who's like 14 or 15, and you're supposed to decide that one path and close the door to other stuff that you may be interested in, right? So that's very interesting. Cyril, I saw you raising your hand earlier.
Hey everyone, hola and Lord, nice to meet you all. It's so interesting to talk about that because I'm Swiss, and the Swiss system, at least when I grew up, it's a little bit easier now, but it was since the age of 10 years old. You would do an exam, and then you would go to the way that push you to university, or the way that push you to apprenticeship, or the ultimate way where you, if you want to go then to university, it's really hard. So when I started there, it was really interesting because I went to the higher way by luck, but I hated that system. They told me you need to know at 10 years old what you're gonna have as a job, and I didn't know. And so I finished school at 16, and I didn't go to high school or university. I did apprenticeship. And I love that because as Rachel mentioned, that you're project-based, and that helped me to thrive on my curiosity, to learn new things, And since then, I've been learning that way. I'm a self-learner from my early age.
I love that. And project-based learning is also something that traditional schools are not that good at. I remember in school we had that one project-based thing that we had to do for the year. It was not embedded. It was not something that was really part of learning. It was like, here's the curriculum. Oh, and by the way, yes, of course, teaching is practical. Here's one practical project that you have to do for that 1 year. And it was almost like checking a box of saying, yeah, of course, there's also practical projects going on here. So you're touching upon something that I think is really interesting. And when you're teaching yourself online, they do tell you every time you read a tutorial, they tell you like, don't just like blindly repeat whatever is going on here. Try to make your own version, try to build your own project, because this is really how you're going to really learn. Anyone else wants to share their experience with self-learning and self-education? Yes, Mark.
I'd say is that like you know, I think we're all curious and self-learners. I don't know why that is. I think sometimes people are just naturally curious, so I'm not gonna pretend to know why. But I will say that there is, just having been that way for a long time, I think I've doubled down on it because of just after acknowledging just the fact that you can't possibly know what's going to be useful, and you also can't possibly know what you're going to find interesting. And so you have to place lots of bets. You have to explore widely, and then just quadruple down on what you like or what's working. But it's like an acknowledgement of our ignorance. Like, you cannot possibly know, you know, I always think about it in terms of when I go out to a restaurant and like at a menu, I'm usually ordering something weird because that might be my next new favorite thing. So, and I don't know, I haven't tasted it yet. I don't even know what it tastes like. So you're always like one book away or one lecture away from like your new passion. And, you know, because you can never know that, like, just kind of go around. I think that it's presumptuous to think that you know what it is you're all about at all times, because you're always kind of changing. So.
Yeah, it sounds like you're not a victim of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You know, like, you don't know what you don't know, and people don't realize how much they don't know. So I don't know if you've seen that curve, right?
You need a new name for the opposite of that, or whatever that is. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. We should have a name for the opposite of that. But yeah, like this curve of people, like, the less they know, the more they think they know, because that's a mouthful, but they don't know what they don't know, basically. And it made me also think about what you just mentioned. Also made me think about something else, about how you say, like, you don't know what's going to be helpful, useful, or what you're going to enjoy, right? This is another thing that I have found between traditional education and self-education, is the how directed it is. Like, in traditional education, this is where you're going to go, and there is a curriculum. So this is exactly the path that we're going to take. And Julie, actually, I would love to hear, like, how, when you work with students, you try to avoid having this very rigid step-by-step manual of everyone does this, and this is exactly what we're expected to do. Whereas in self-education, it feels more like a tree that you explore, and sometimes you're like, actually, that branch is not that interesting. Let me go back and like try and explore something else. But you don't have this linear prescribed curriculum of things you're going to learn, whether you like them or not. So that's what do you think about that, Julie? I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
I figure out at the beginning of every year that the first like third of the semester is going to be fundamentals, and that's that. Sometimes it's super boring, but it happens. And then for the last 2/3, I'm a huge proponent of project-based learning. I've written a ton of research papers on it. I think it's like absolutely critical that we completely change our paths to be project-based. And something that I love about teaching university students, and especially in classes where all of them have different majors, is that all of them have different skill sets. And so as much as I hated group projects as a student, I always make sure to do a group project that spans the entire semester and allows all of my students to highlight the thing that they think that they're good at. So they can kind of pick a topic that's interesting to them and then be able to focus on one specific area. So they'll all learn from each other, but they'll all also get to highlight the thing that they think is really special about themselves.
This is such a positive way to go about it too, because we tend to focus on what we're not good at and sometimes beat ourselves up because we're like, why do I suck at this thing? Where are other people good at it and I'm not good at it? Whereas your approach with the group learning and highlighting what you're good at, it is much more reflective of how teamwork actually works in the workplace. Wow, that was a lot of work in the same sentence. But you're never expected in the workplace to be the jack of all trades who's going to be able to do everything on your own, right? It's your team. And so someone is going to be better than you are at other stuff. And a better skill probably to have is to be able to identify what you're good at and to be able to communicate it and to be able to identify the right people to work with and to be able to work together with them. Like that's going to be probably a more important skill in life than just trying to master absolutely everything.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to drag out of college students sometimes, but once, and I'll even start with brainstorming sessions and just say, all right, completely unrelated to this class, if you had to talk for an hour about something, what could you talk about?
That's amazing. Adelaida, did you just join, or I feel like I just saw you pop up on my screen, but I'm not sure.
I just switched from my phone to computer.
Okay, that's why.
So there's something that I thought about. I read this definition of luck recently that I really liked, and it reminded me how 75% of the jobs don't exist, and you have to constantly learn to keep up and have a chance. And it's like you're at a bus stop, and the bus is luck, and it passes, but it has no schedule, and you have to be ready with all these skills and things to get on, or else you miss it. So it's like all of the self-learning that happens between the buses is what makes you like lucky in life or not. And I feel like if you just don't go past your university or official schooling, like you're never gonna have luck because the bus is gonna keep passing and you're not skilling up or learning. So I like that definition of it.
That's a great metaphor. And this is why some people say you create your own luck, right? Is that it obviously there are massive elements of luck in life and privilege that some people have and some people don't, that really is stuff that you can't control. But there is also luck that you cannot control the luck itself exactly, but you can make sure that you're able to get on the bus when it arrives. So I really like this one. I may steal it from you if that's okay.
It's from the book The Third Door, just to give credit.
Nice. Okay. Can you share the name and or a link or something in the chat so people, because later I'm going to share the chat log too, so people can go and click on these things. And it's true for everyone. If there are any resource or anything, please do feel free to put them in the chat so we have them afterwards. Anyone else has any thoughts, either their personal experience or just on what we just talked about? Yes, Nish.
Yeah, so I used to work as a tech recruiter. So I used to source and interview software engineers for a startup in San Francisco. And I mean I almost never look at credentials or degrees or things like that, and neither do the interviewers, especially if it's for like a normal like software engineering role. We look more for projects and like the things that they pursue on the side. So things like side projects or like GitHub contributions or Quora answers, Stack Overflow answers. So it's just like these things on the side that you do outside of schooling. And I feel like traditional education institutions don't really encourage this, or like it's seen as like a side thing that you do to like complete a piece of homework or something. But I feel like if you have your own kind of portfolio of or like body of work that you do on the side as a side learning thing, and a lot of engineers do side projects just to learn a new technology, then it tells you more about that person than any sort of certificate or credential, right? And so yeah, I think projects are such a great way to know what sort of problems that people have worked to solve before, and so it kind of tells you that they're more likely to be able to solve those problems in the future. Yeah, so from like an interviewing like careers perspective, I think like that's what I've found. So that's what I kind of realized from my experience as a recruiter, how for a lot of career paths, experience and project-based pursuits are more important than credentials.
And it does tie back a little bit to what Julie was saying earlier too, is that, you know, knowing yourself, knowing what you're good at, and knowing how to find the answers is probably a bit more important than actually like acquiring pure, you know, out of context knowledge, basically. And you'd probably rather work with someone who's like, yes, I don't know everything by heart, but if I'm stuck, I have a problem, I know that I'll be able to like go and Google it and go on Stack Overflow, get the answer, or maybe find the right person or mentor to help me and kind of like debug it together. In the long run, this is probably more helpful than someone who had perfect grades in school, where it's not necessarily related to how actually we work and we build projects. So I think, yeah, no, this is really relevant. Oh, I'm seeing lots of hands raised. Najla, you were the first one, so go ahead.
Thank you. So this topic really ties with curiosity, and for me, my experience is I think that I'm really obsessed with curriculums and how can one construct their views on the world in a really right way. And when I searched the literature, that was this whole year. So in education studies, they don't pay a lot of attention on autodidactism, and I think the reason why is because it really does not pay to the economy in a direct way. So there's nothing constructive there. And on the mention of constructivism, so a lot of people say that like in education, you know, when constructivism, it's basically the philosophy of that you should build your knowledge in a certain way. And some people argue that it does not actually add to the overall like creativity and diversity of like knowledge profiles of people. So this is like my summary with it is that I'm really approaching it as a researcher, mainly because of how obsessed I am with knowledge in general, like in all forms. So this is my summary with it. I sent a question and I'm really curious. Are all self-learners interested in intellectually challenging activities? Ooh. And I sent the core, which was in the chat. You can reference to it. They like use it to understand how inclined the person towards intellectually challenging tasks.
This is so interesting. Wait, what does the link say that? Is that I don't have the chat open right now, so I'm just focusing on the conversation. But does it say that yes, that's the case, that people are more likely to be interested in intellectually challenging tasks when they're self-learners, or what does it say?
No, I don't know. It doesn't say anything. Yeah, I'm just asking that question. Like maybe I'm asking you directly. Are you all like, I'm guessing that everyone who came here is a self-learner. So are you more inclined towards intellectually challenging tasks?
That's an amazing, okay, that's a great question. I have hands raised. Can you like first answer the question from Najla, because I think it's very interesting, and then you can share whatever you were planning on sharing. So next we're going to go with Jose.
Yeah, hi. I think based on the discussion, I mean, it's pretty clear that kind of self-learning is good, and I share in the community that, I mean, self-learning is up to a place because we are all learning in a community with other people in the class, online, in Twitter. So that's just a thought, but I wanted to ask maybe, is there any, I mean, we all have started some online courses and so on, but how can we ensure that we keep our goal and the path? So how to ensure that we learn what we want to learn and not find too much difficulties on the way and just give up and so on. I think that could be also an interesting discussion.
That's a really great point, because one of the advantages of traditional education still is that, like, you know, in the case of Julie, for example, you do have a guide, and it doesn't mean that it has to be, if you have a good teacher, it doesn't have to be a very rigid one or with lots of structure, but at least if you're stuck, or if you have questions, or if you're unsure as to what would make most sense to go and study next, you have someone who can give you a little bit of hand holding. And so I think you're raising an important aspect here, that actually there are also advantages to a more traditional education where you're, you know, both in terms of motivation and of having a little bit of structure, it can actually be helpful. So that's very interesting. And if anyone has thoughts on this, please do raise your hand, because I think that's really interesting.
And maybe just to add that these online communities also could serve that purpose up to a point of helping people give direction. Like I have learned a lot in Twitter, like what to learn next, and keep getting ideas from people. So that could be a bit kind of the 21st century older people, adult learning way, if you don't have a mentor.
Absolutely, yeah. And I see a few people, like, say, mentioning a mentor in the chat as well. So I think that's definitely something that can be helpful, or a community like this one that we have together too, where you can kind of learn together. Okay, Jen, go ahead. Oh, and Rachel, Rachel, I have a few people who raised their hands, so I think it will be less training for you if you click on the actual, like, icon for raising your hands, if you want to talk later. But yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, hi. Yeah, so nice to be here, everyone. I wanted to share kind of how when I graduated college 2 years ago from university, I'd gotten a finance degree and I was working at a bank and I was doing risk insurance work. And this is kind of going to the beginning of our conversation, but I kind of felt like I didn't enjoy it and I wasn't good at it. And my manager and my team were like pointing out all my weaknesses of like asking too many questions and like challenging like the process and all these things that I just felt like I didn't fit in. So then I kind of decided I wanted to figure out how to be a self-learner and like kind of not leave my credential in the dust, but like it definitely was scary to go from like having that structure to not having that structure. And I started to kind of identify myself as a learn-it-all because when I worked at the bank, I saw myself surrounded with a lot of know-it-alls who didn't want to be challenged or anything. So I kind of like came to that after I read like a pivotal book about the growth mindset by Carol Dweck. And it was kind of like a moment like Mark was mentioning earlier where you never know what book is going to be the next book that kind of changes your worldview. And so I kind of feel like I'm struggling in that when you do go off that traditional path, it's like you do want to follow your intuition and your curiosity. But going back to Najla's question of you want to challenge yourself and you're very like introspectively trying to figure out like what the next option is, but it's hard to figure out and recognize what your strengths are and not pinpoint the weaknesses of what you want to reinforce. And I feel like I'm talking about a bunch of different things right now, but I kind of just wanted to share how there is kind of that uncharted territory because you feel like everything's a possibility, but you don't know like which possibility is the right one.
This is a great point. I think every self-learner has felt that at some point, where it's literally like the world is your oyster. You can learn literally anything you want. And I know, manifestation of this in my case, and I think it's the case for lots of people here, is that I tend to buy so many books about lots of different topics, and they're like piling up. And I'm genuinely curious about them, and I do want to read them about physics and philosophy and like everything. And every time I'm like trying to pick my next book, I'm like, well, how do I make a rational decision about this? Like, how am I going to decide what's the next one I'm going to read? They all sound so interesting. And I think for people like you all who are curious, today's world, the same way, with food, we have all of those supermarkets where you're like, can buy anything, right? I think with like intellectual food too, it's the same today. We're like kids in the candy store where it's really hard to know what you want to do. And it's also, you know, just to take the candy metaphor a little bit a step further, it's also hard to know in advance, like before you're reading the book or before taking the course, if it's going to be junk food or actually nourishing. And it's very, very hard to know in advance. So I think, yes, what you're talking about here makes a lot of sense and is very interesting. Who do we have here? Rika.
Hi, everyone. Wanted to go back to a previous point about schooling and how when you're so young, you don't really know what it is that you want to do. And as a kid in school, there's also so many competing priorities, right? Like you're concerned about other kids and your parents, and there's just too much. So that's the first point. And then the second point that was also brought up earlier is about the tools that are available. There's been like all these new cool tools like Coursera and Khan Academy, and they provide resources, but to me it feels like there's something missing there. There's not enough structure, and I think that maybe the next tooling that is going to occur, or the next company that is going to take advantage of this is going to be a company that combines like Khan Academy and Coursera, and then also mentorship, and just has like these other missing pieces that are necessary for someone who is a self-learner. And I'm just curious, like, what those missing pieces are. It's not really something that we need to discuss here, but I think that it's an important thing to think about. What are the missing pieces that Khan Academy is not able to fulfill?
Absolutely. This is a great point. I think there are a couple that kind of organically came up in the conversation, in which you mentioned as well, right? Mentorship, for example. Like that's what we talked about earlier, how in traditional education, you have someone guiding you, which has value in itself, and which you don't have today with Coursera or Khan Academy, right? Another one that came up in the conversation earlier was community, like having peers that can support you and where you can go through the struggle together or work on projects together, or, you know, have fun together in the learning process, which most like MOOCs right now, like Coursera, Udemy, or whatever, it's pretty much a single player game at this point. Like you're just doing your course, right? And I think this is a great question. If anyone has thoughts in terms of what are these missing blocks, like either put it in the chat or raise your hand, because I think it's a very interesting question. We have Rachel. I can't tell, Rachel, if you're raising your hand or not, or you're waving, like just
Sorry, no, I have some insights because I work in the education space, and all the points that you've raised, like the kind of having a go-to person and someone who's experienced it. So there's a cultural difference anyway for more that are slightly more social learners, and those that are westernized, that are used to a level of competitiveness and benchmarking and using that as their motivation and accountability. But motivation accountability could be slightly different in certain other cultures, such as with people. And that people could be just being there with them, that someone else is there, but it could be slightly more guidance. So there's different levels, and that's what we found. Like, you got the mentor who shares previous experiences. You've got the coach who really tried to question and distill what your strengths are and get you to reframe things that you might not have thought about. It's your thinking space. So that sense of humanness still needs to be there. And that's why you mentioned community as well. And it's exactly why MOOC and stuff, personally, it doesn't work for me, because that's the missing component. That's something that Insights just really recently with learners, the COVID period, of those who can really self-study and those who can't. And the ones who can't, it's actually the mindset as well. How do I get into the right state to study? Because if I'm not feeling calm or relaxed, you know, I'm going to be overwhelmed. So that's really important, that maybe that emotional need we don't really cover. We cover a lot of the functional ones. What do I need to learn? What's the next goal? But actually taking that holistic view will make a huge difference. So that's what I've learned from Insights I thought I'd share with you guys.
This is a great point, and I think it's even more applicable in the sense that lots of self-learners, adult self-learners, also have a full-time job on the side, or they're like, you know, there's a lot going on, like, or they can have a family they need to take care of, etc. And a lot of them try to squeeze the self-education in whatever time they have, whatever space they have. And we think about the physical space of finding time to do it, but you raise a great point that you also need to have the psychological and emotional space to be able to learn. And you know, you hear lots of people who struggle in teaching themselves new stuff just because they come back home, they're completely exhausted, they have to take care of the kids, and then they manage to finally put them in bed, and then what do they want to do? Yes, they'd rather watch Netflix, like something silly, than actually sit down and be like, let me study philosophy or science or whatever, which is completely understandable. And right now the MOOCs, they don't offer this emotional scaffolding to actually support you with that part of the learning process. So yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. This is great. We have Steve.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think we got to a very good point here when we brought up this kind of emotional aspect. I've been thinking about these things in the bigger framework of explore versus exploit. To me, the self-learning feels a lot more like exploration than what I experience in school, which is very much here's a known problem, you're kind of in exploit mode. And I think most of the tools that we have today, or even mindsets, or kind of the processes we have, are not really optimized for this exploration. And just like was just mentioned, right? If a lot of exploration from humans' perspective, I think it is sort of driven by a subconscious mind, versus the exploit mode is a lot more reliant on the conscious mind. So indeed, like, we would need some kind of support for us to feel comfortable enough to almost like let down the guard and let our curiosity and impulses drive us to learn something that we almost have no idea what the return on investment would be. But then you get into pretty deep systematic problems, because you know, this entire thing of, well, we're supposed to be using our time for the best return, right? So that's a difficult challenge. And I think the other challenge is there's our value system almost needs to change. Like, we've prided ourselves for, you know, many thousands of years based on, you know, our knowledge, what we know. But I think with the advance of, you know, technology and things like AI, we'll start to get to a point where our value system needs to change. We as human can no longer, we are valuable because we're knowledgeable. I think it would have to turn into something more like we are valuable because we're able to quickly find the information that's necessary to apply to whatever problem we have at hand. And I think a lot of those problems actually require more softer skills. Like, it's only done by human, not because it needs to be done by human, but it might be like better to have a human than a machine for whatever purpose. So yeah, value system, and that also leads to like incentive structure might need to change. Like, a lot of the mediums today is kind of built on top of this concept of knowledge is something to be guarded, and, you know, it has a price, right? And there's not a lot of platforms that's really aiming for what is the most efficient way, absolute most efficient way to share a piece of knowledge. Because if you can absorb a wiki page in 1 second, then someone's losing revenue somewhere. And so I think these are questions that I've been thinking about, and I think it's kind of relevant here.
It's so interesting, and I saw in the chat briefly earlier that Sylvia actually mentioned soft skills as well, and I see you raising your hand. And Ajmal, I saw you, but it's just because Sylvia mentioned that earlier, so it may make sense for her to speak now. Go ahead, Sylvia.
Yeah, I was talking about soft skills, and in addition to that, I was reading on the chat that we are talking about the difference of learning towards a specific goal or for simple curiosity. I would like to add another paradigm to this. For me, we need to think about self-learning differently if we're learning something new, like completely new. For instance, let's say I want to know about history. I just learned things at school, but I don't remember anything. I may start from scratch. This needs to apply to a different technique. That's something, for instance, for my job, I have some basics and I just need to learn with a MOOC or something. And soft skills are kind of the same. We have some basics. We may not have the right ones, but we have some of them. So for me, I don't know how to deal with both. I don't know how to start from scratch. I don't know, do I have to plan? Do I have to? And if I start from scratch, it may seem so long that I may lose motivation at some point. So I don't know.
This is a great one. I think we should have one of the very first meetup we did at Ness Labs, and the only one that was in person, because then 2020 happened. So they're all been online now, was actually about metacognition. And this addresses a lot of what you just described here, because this is really thinking about thinking and what's the best approach to learn. Like exactly what you described. I'm trying to, acquire a very new skill, or I'm trying to improve on an existing one. So what strategies am I going to put in place? And how do I evaluate these strategies? Because it's one thing to pick a strategy, but it would be kind of inefficient to just keep on applying the same thing without asking yourself afterwards, like, is it working or not? Is it really the best way to go about it? And I've had a few people already message me and saying, hey, can we do that one again? So I'll probably do another virtual meetup all around metacognition, and we can discuss this, because it's super relevant not only to self-education, but to so many things, just like thinking in general, and being productive while taking care of your mental health. Like, it's very relevant to lots of things. So thanks so much for bringing that up, because it reminds me I need to do another one like that. Ajmal, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, so thanks for bringing it up. So actually my question, so I'm curious about something along the line, right? Like, as a self-learners, do we have like some hacks or technique? I think you mentioned technique on how you do it. So at least for myself, I find myself like trying to, take a look at polyglots, for example, right? Like, how can a person know 8 to 9 languages, right? I'm bilingual. I'm learning my third language, and it just makes me feel overwhelmed, but motivated at the same time, right? Like, how can this person spend 1 hour and learn so much, and I spend 1 hour and I get to nowhere, right? So just curious, like how others sort of do this. So you can see my setup and stuff. So what I do with this setup is actually I stream my learnings, right? I share it with my friends, that people that I'm comfortable with, so that I don't slacking, right? Like I can just try to learn something and then open up another tab and get distracted, right? So I just curious, is there any other way that at least for me, the way I do it is I put myself in an uncomfortable place, right? I go and take a look at polymath, polyglots, and then be friend with them, and then get to witness them learn, like, speaking 8 to 9 languages, and I start to feel like I'm not making good use of my time, and that sort of kicked me to be productive. So
This is great. I think you're touching on something that's also important, is that learning is really about, you mentioned like doing stuff that makes you feel uncomfortable. And this is really what it is about, right? Because if you just keep on doing what feels comfortable, it means that your brain has already encoded that information, and that if you're not feeling like you're stretching yourself, it means you're not really learning. You're just kind of just practicing whatever you already know. So that's why, comfortable is when you learn a new language. Comfortable is sitting in front of a list of vocabulary and trying to learn it by heart. And you're like, yeah, cool, I know words. Uncomfortable is getting on the call every 2 days with a native speaker and having the rule that you cannot use your own native language. And when I was, please don't ask me to speak Japanese because I forgot everything. But when I was learning Japanese at the time, that's what I did. And that was the most uncomfortable thing ever, having to sit through, it was torture. 1 hour of chatting in Japanese with someone, and I didn't have the right to use any word in English. I learned so fast though by doing this, but it was really, really hard. So I think obviously it varies and you have to decide what works. Again, metacognition, and I've seen in the chat that everyone is like, yeah, count me in, I want to do it. So we'll definitely do that. It's really about testing and evaluating what works for you. A good rule of thumb, and this is why, again, in tutorials, they tell you don't just apply it without thinking. You have to make your own project. A good rule of thumb I found is that if you don't feel like you're stretching yourself a little bit, you're probably not really learning. Like you're just giving yourself the illusion of learning, but not really. Adelaida, go ahead. And I think you'll be what does it say? 2 people. I only see 1. No, it's just you. Adelaida, go ahead. You'll probably be the last one to speak. Go ahead.
Well, I feel like a lot happened since I raised my hand. I actually just started learning something from scratch. So I was in that whole, where do I even start? Because I don't know anything about this. And what I ended up doing was I went on Udemy and I got the highest rated one. And I'm like, okay, well, if 2,000 people are rating it so high, he must know something. And so I started there, and then certain terms that I didn't understand, I went down the YouTube black hole. And then it's there you find kind of your mentors, because they have the best videos explaining all the concepts you're confused about. And then from there, I found out I found a community, and that way I get my social, if I get frustrated with the question I can't find or something, I get that in. And then as far as the doing, I don't feel, so the language thing, I totally relate. I'm like, okay, I booked a trip to Paris or something when I was learning French, and I'm like, okay, well, I have to. So for this, I set myself a goal. I'm like, I'm gonna go really hard studying it for 1 month, and then I told myself you're gonna jump in no matter how prepared or not you are, and even if it's with little amounts and stuff, you're jumping in. So I set myself that one thing, so I get comfortable just getting enough knowledge in, but I know it's not going to go to next level or really settle in unless I start experimenting and doing it myself. And then when I do it, I just take a million notes and tweak and stuff. But I think what I originally raised my hand about was, I know we were talking at the beginning at some point about university, and I know there's been they're starting to pop up new concepts of ones, and I'm really curious what you guys are thinking the future of universities are, because I think taking 4 years to learn one thing is outdated, and I'm like, do you think people just get together to earn certificates that take 3 months, and maybe what universities teach you is I don't know if you guys have heard of the global citizenship thing, but you learn empathy, critical thinking, shared universal values like peace, justice, and human rights, and then problem solving, ability to communicate and collaborate with others, conflict resolution, sense and security or identity, and self and others, respect for diversity, intercultural understanding, and then recognition of global issues. So interconnectedness, social, economic, and environmental. And I was thinking, like, how cool would it be if university actually taught you those things, or like networking, because your network is your net worth, or whatever, you know, like things that actually matter and that you can keep doing in life no matter what like road you take or what job comes up, and just learning how to learn and think for yourself and like all those things. So I don't know. I'm curious what you guys think the future of university is.
This is amazing. I love that. And this is also, I always try to be trying to contain these in 1 hour. And every time it's like, oh my God, there's just so much to explore. But I think actually, again, that would make for an amazing topic for another whole virtual meetup. Like, what should we teach at university? Or should university still exist? Or should it look completely different in the future? I think there's enough material here to have a proper 1 hour conversation. So I'm actually also going to add this one to my list. And Alderaida, I'll write you on the forums just to make sure that we pick a day and a time where you can join, since, yes, like you're the one who asked the question. Okay, I'm seeing that we have 2 more people who raised their hand while I said you were going to be the last one talking. I have Davida and Anusha. Do you want Davida to unmute quickly and say what you wanted to share?
Yeah, I just had a really quick comment. I just joined the community last week, so this is my first call, and I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for creating this space. Like, you guys are the tribe that I didn't know I needed, and I just wanted to have that moment of gratitude. That's all.
Davida, thank you so much. Like, literally feeling emotional. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's so great that you joined. And it's, you know, in these conversations, like, as I say, like, some people like to just join and listen, and that's really fine. I also really embrace this, but I really hope that next time we get to chat a little bit more together so we can get to know each other. And Anusha, do you want to unmute quickly and say what you wanted to say, or is it more of a long open question thing that you wanted to share?
Sure, yeah. So I actually just posted in the chat, like I was telling that one of my ex-bosses once said that constant learning is a form of escapism. So I just wanted to sort of explore and understand what others thought about it, but we could always take it back in the forums as well. And another thing that I also wanted to add here is culturally, there are some degrees or some schools of thought that comes with education. So in India, there's a running joke that you first study to be an engineer and then you figure out what you want to do. So that is one of the trains of thought that I always had, that like my degree, which is engineering, was not useful to whatever I was doing right now. But then over the course of time, I've realized that the mindset, or even the like unconsciously, I've learned a lot of things from my degree in engineering. So it might not be the information or facts that I've retained, but it's like a mindset that I've probably internalized that I don't even realize. So that was also another question that I wanted to pose, like what our traditional systems have taught us in terms of mindsets, but not necessarily in terms of us retaining information. That's it.
I love that. Okay, there's like, as often with these meetups, and this is why I said, like, you know, this is not a masterclass or workshop or presentation. We have sometimes more questions than answers at the end of the conversation, which is great because everyone can go then and explore them and maybe, like, you know, write about them, do more research, etc. So please do feel free to do that. I will post both the recording and the chat log in the forums, and you're free to come in the forums and kind of continue the conversation. I'm also going to add events about the 2 topics that we said, like, you know, metacognition, future of university, so we can talk about it more. And also just a reminder that I personally lead 2 conversations a month, but you're super welcome as a member to lead a conversation about absolutely anything you're interested in. So if there's anything that you would love to talk about with the rest of the community that you care about, that would be interesting for you to explore together, you can just drop me a message on the forums, or you all have my email, I think. and let me know what you want to organize, and I can help you set it up. So just remember that that's an option if you leave those meetups frustrated because you want to talk more about these things. You can totally do that. And I want to thank you all so much. I'm so grateful for you all and for this conversation. And I will see you, I think the next one is in about 2 weeks, and the topic is going to be mind wandering, and if it's art or science and how we can make the most of it. So thank you everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day or your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.